Good morning to one and all. Today we are going to discuss about building blocks of an entity relationship diagram. Building blocks of an ER diagram. In this, we are mainly discuss about entity, entity type, attribute, relationship briefly. Building blocks of an entity relationship diagram. The basic building blocks of entity relationship diagram are entity, attribute, and relationship. Entity, attribute, and relationship. These three are the building blocks of a ER diagram. First, we will discuss about entity. What is entity? An entity is an object that exists and is unique from other objects. In other words, the entity can be uniquely identified. That means an entity is anything. An entity is anything such as a person, place, thing, or event. About which data are to be collected and stored. Entity may be physical objects such as customers or products, whatever it may be. In this, some of the examples of entities are a particular person. For example, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam is an entity. A particular department, for example, Electronics and Communications Engineering Department, CSE, Computer Science, Mathematics, Physics, etc. A particular place, for example, Coimbatore city can be an entity. Ramchandrapuram can be an entity. This is about entity. So, entity is anything. Entity is anything. It can be person, place, or thing, whatever it may be. Next one is entity type. Entity type. An entity type or entity set is a collection of similar entities. Entity type or entity set, whatever it can be. We can also name it as entity sets. So, entity set is a set of entities. Entity set is a set of entities of the same type. That share the same properties or attributes. So, entity set is a set of entities of the same type that share the same properties or attributes. The set of all persons who are customers at a given bank. Example. Entity set is an example for customers of banks. All students in VSM college, say student entity. All students in VSM college, okay, it is nothing but entity set student. All courses in VSM college, say course. Entity type is course. All departments in VSM college, say department. So, department is an entity type. Course is an entity type. Student is an entity type. Next one is relationship. The association among entities is called relationship. The association among entities is called relationship. So, a relationship describes an association among entities. It may be entities two or more. Entities. A relationship describes an association among entities. For example, there is a relationship between customers and agents that may be described as an agent can serve many customers and each customer may be served by one agent. That is relationship. Once again, there is a relationship between customers and agents that may be described as an agent can serve many customers and each customer may be served by one agent. That is relationship. Teachers is the relationship. Teachers is the relationship type between lecturer and student. So, lecturer and students are entities. Teachers is the relationship. So, we can represent as teachers is the relationship type between lecturer and student. Buying is the relationship between vendor and customers. Here, vendor and customers are two entities. Vendor and customers are two entities. In that, buying is the relationship. The name of the relationship is buying between vendor and customer entities. Treatment is the relationship between doctor and patient. Doctor and patients are two entities. Between these two entities, treatment is the relationship name. Treatment is the relationship. This is about relationships. We will discuss later detail about relationships, types of relationships, etc. Next one is attributes. Attributes are properties of entity types. Attributes are properties of entity types. In other words, entities are described in a database by a set of attributes. Attributes are properties of entity types. So, an attribute is a characteristic of an entity. It is also property is nothing but characteristic. An attribute is a characteristic of an entity. For example, customer entity would be described by attributes. Customer entity would be described by attributes such as customer last name, customer first name, customer phone number, customer address, customer credit limit. These all are properties of an entity. We can also name it as attribute. Roll number, name and grade are the attributes of student. Student is the entity. Student is entity. In that, roll number, name and grade. These all are attributes of particular entity student. Brand, cost and weight are the attributes of cell phone. Brand, cost and weight are the attributes of cell phone. Here cell phone is the entity. In that entity cell phone, brand, cost, weight are the attributes. That means properties of an entity. Properties of cell phone. That is also known as characteristics of cell phone. This is about attributes. Next one, ER diagram. ER diagram. The ER diagram is nothing but entity relationship diagram. The ER diagram is used to represent data scheme. The ER diagram is used to represent database scheme. In that, we little bit discuss about the representation of ER diagram. A rectangle represents an entity set or entity. Entity can be represented in rectangle. Entity can be represented in rectangle. An ellipse represents an attribute. Ellipse represents an attribute. So, ellipse in attribute can be represented in ellipse form. Attribute can be represented in ellipse. A diamond represents a relationship. Relationship can be represented in diamond shaped symbol. In diamond shaped symbol. Lines represent linking of attributes to entity sets. Lines represent linking of attributes to entity sets and of entity sets to relationship sets. So, lines may be represented to link the attribute to entity, entity to relationships sets. Double ellipse, which represent multi-valued attributes, ellipse. Dashed ellipse, which denote derived attributes, Double lines, which indicate total participation of an entity in a relationship set. These are the representation of ER diagrams. In ER diagram we are used entity, attribute, relationships. These three are mainly used in ER diagrams. So we take an example of ER diagram. Let us consider a simple ER diagram as shown in the screen. In the ER diagram, the two entities are student and class. These are the entities. Student and class are the entities. Attributes which are associated with the student are roll number and name. These two are attributes for student entity. Roll number and name. These two attributes are associated with the entity student. Whereas class is another entity. For class entity, subject name and hall number. These two are attributes. Subject name and hall number. The relationship between the two entities, that means the relationship between the two entities are student and class. These two are entities. That relationship can be represented in the diagram attends. Relationship name is attends. Attends is the relationship between student and class entities. We can represent the ER diagram in this way. For this class, we learn about building blocks of an entity relationship diagram. The building blocks are, and primary elements are entities, attributes, relationships. We discussed about entity, attribute and relationship. And another one is how to represent the ER diagram. And some example of an ER diagram we already discussed. So in this topic, the assignment questions are: explain about entity, attribute and relationship. Explain about ER diagram and example of an ER diagram. So these two questions are the assignments. Thank you, one and all.